Kevin. I see Bob. Welcome.
Hello.
Hey, Bob.
Was anybody else joining us from your end?
I think Matt Gordon was going to join, and Dimitri.
Yeah, he's
Right.
probably going to be a little late. His neighbor came down with COVID, and he had to get him to the hospital, so he's probably going to be a little bit late.
I see.
That's not a good situation.
No.
No. Any objection? Oh, there's Matt.
Hey, Matt. Long time no talk. All of what, 2 hours since last we spoke?
If Matt is looking a little beleaguered, he has a newborn, and he's changing diapers full time again. Like something Kevin can relate to as well, right?
Yeah. All day.
Water under the bridge here. Any objection to us getting started?
No, that's good.
All right. It's just after 2. Just so you're aware, we are going to hit record. Rob, I guess you're about to do that now.
We are recording.
Okay. We are doing this for each of our meetings, not exclusive to you, but so that it is part of the record.
So the recording itself goes into the record?
Yeah, Bob. So we do that. We convert it. Gets put onto a YouTube page, and then the YouTube link is entered into the record. So if you go to the project page, you'll see the other recordings already listed.
Great. Okay, thank you for that.
Mhm.
Is any text recap of the meeting?
Not at this time.
Do any of the other meetings have a text recap?
Not at this time.
Yeah. I guess this is a topic that probably requires less of an introduction for this team than maybe it does for others. So I think we can forego most of that, but just kick this off with a reminder that the intent of this is to go through the master plan amendment as introduced in greater detail, so that you have an opportunity to see it laid out in greater detail, and so that you have an opportunity to ask questions as we go along. Rob is a seasoned presenter now with this, but if you have questions as he goes along, don't be afraid to either put your hand up or throw out a question, or if you prefer to wait to the end, that's okay too. However you want to handle it, we're here for a question and answer session with you. Kevin, as we've discussed, staff is not in a position to propose any changes to the amendment right now. It's been introduced. That would be a function of the planning commission to decide to do that. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Rob to start the presentation.
Thanks, Tom.
If I could.
Sure.
Rob, your presentation, I've participated in 2 or 3 of these.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, Kevin. I know you've seen this.
I've heard it. The rest of
we're open. If you don't wish to hear the presentation again, or something else, we're obviously open.
So my question is whether or not your presentation contains anything different than.
It is exactly the same, just for standardization. Everybody we meet with, Kevin, it's the same presentation.
Is it essentially the same presentation that you made to the joint session of the Mayor and Council and Planning Commission as well?
No, this is somewhat changed. This is really providing an overview and some context, including timelines, Bob. So this is same presentation given to Montgomery Village, to the chamber, to obviously you guys. So again, Asbury. So it is the full presentation. So again, I know Kevin has seen it as probably as many times as we've given it. So it's really, I'll leave it to Kevin. You're Kevin's team. You guys haven't seen it. So if Kevin feels there's worth for the team to see it, we're happy to move forward with it. But there's nothing different, Kevin, than what you've already seen before.
I think we'd probably be inclined, if my timing is correct, I think Tom suggested 90 minutes. We'd probably like to take advantage of as much of that 90 minutes as we can and ask questions. And Tom, you preface this by saying questions in regards to the document itself. Some of our questions venture slightly outside of that document itself, but they pertain to the document. So this isn't inquisition about all things Gaithersburg. They all pertain to this document.
Maybe we can address them as we go along, Kevin.
Sure.
So for clarification purposes, Kevin, would you like me to do the presentation or not?
I don't think it's necessary, no.
Okay.
Some of our questions will probably be out of order in terms of the sequence of the draft, Rob, that you prepared. Given how many times you've been through it, you should be able to kind of jump from place to place, but it's not our intent to go out of order. I think just some of the questions by their nature will probably be out of order of the page numbers. Kind of initial question I have is I get it. You guys are professional staff and the decision makers, planning commission and council, give the direction and make the decisions. As the professional staff, is it your guys' intention that this is a document that is or can be implemented soon, within a few years, or is this an instrument that's intended to be implemented decades down the road? And I ask that, Rob, because more than a couple occasions you've talked about the freedom that the current property owners have to repopulate their buildings under the current C2 zoning and so forth. I'm perhaps out of curiosity, but a little bit more so than that, what is the intent time-wise of the implementation of this document from staff?
Not to dodge the question, there really is no intent. We feel obviously if the owners so choose and the market was there, this could be implemented in the near term. As Bob and Matt can attest to, the land use article for municipalities lays out that master plans get reviewed every 10 years. So that's really like the outside scope of where we do our master plans, and that's why we placed in here the condition that this be re-reviewed in 10 years. This is why we also wrote in there that at a certain point, if there doesn't seem to be traction, the ability or the recognition that there may need to be public investment to, and whatever that is, whatever level of government that is, we don't define these things, but that could be expected also. But in simple terms, Kevin, to your point, we are not the county. We don't work on 20-year master plans. So again, there's a lot of factors here. So anytime within, a 10-year window, we could envision this beginning, ending, starting. We just don't want to be naive enough based upon experience to say, hey, once this gets adopted, you're going to see movement in 2 weeks.
Okay, that's good. And I get it. You guys, John, I know at one point you had, if we rewind the clock 18 months ago or thereabouts, you had wanted to hire an outside firm to kind of couple with this exercise the economic realities of whether or not to kind of couple with that, hey, what might the market actually support? And last year was last year. Everyone's budgets were tightened, probably the cities, I presume, and you guys kind of made the decision, well, let's not get the outside special study group involved. Let's just do it in-house. So I presume that means that this study has no input from the demand side, the private industry, other than your periodic focus groups to see what they think they want on this property. It has no, which perhaps the special study group would have provided, we have no idea what the timeline might be, whether it's 10 years as you talked about or 20 years down the road. We just don't know if the market supports this document. Is that right?
I think, Kevin, the special study area, just two things for clarification. It would work on the same timeline as this. The reason there was that market analysis was that included actual design plans. And I know, while Bob and Matt are relatively new to this master plan, as we sort of talk about, discusses the what, sometimes the how, but not the where. When you enter into the design aspects in that special study area, the RFP that was issued was to come up with 3 specific design plans that they would have been the sketch plan. So therefore, that warranted more a straight market analysis, but that market analysis was also spread out, forecasting 10 years into the
I'm
future.
just closing my blinds. I'm not.
That's fine.
It's glaring off the table.
But I say, you're done already? I was like,
Yeah.
this is the best meeting ever. That's so fast.
All right, so not that anyone's filibustering, but the takeaway is that we as a group here on this call, we have no idea if the market supports what has been drafted here, because there's been no special study group, there's been no consultation with private market. We don't know if the demand is here to do all or any parts of this, right? Because we haven't talked to them. You guys haven't talked to them. Correct? I mean, you don't know.
I candidly don't know how to answer this one.
Well, you either know or you don't know. Or Sharon or Tom, maybe one of you, you're the economic development arm.
Because the master plan amendment doesn't say this must be built in these specific locations, it just provides grand parameters, then actually determining demand and absorption, how would we do that since we're not actually looking at quantified numbers of specific development in certain locations? We actually felt that it was inappropriate. Any market analysis we would have done had we pursued the original RFP would have provided information that had been completely made irrelevant due to the pandemic and the rapid changes in the types of uses, market demand, and all that. So what this master plan provides are rather large parameters, but it does not specify, this amount in these locations. And therefore we weren't legally required to provide a market analysis, nor were we providing a market analysis that was irrelevant. What we built in was a lot of flexibility. So if someone wanted to do development and did a market analysis, they would see what these large parameters are. You work within that.
Got it. So we don't know. And are you saying, Sharon, that the special study that was 18 months ago proposed at that time, if it had been done due to the pandemic, it would be irrelevant at this point? Is that what
Well, we said a market analysis, if it had been done at the beginning of the pandemic, would not have been appropriate. And that would have also been tied to an RFP that, as Rob said, had design alternatives.
I'm curious why the market analysis at that time, pre-pandemic, why would it now be irrelevant?
Because there have been so many changes in all kinds of uses.
Okay.
Anyone can tell you the demand in office, in retail, all that has changed. We've seen a great increase in life sciences here. We've seen demand for last mile stuff in our market. All kinds of things have changed.
So then a study, a market analysis done 18 months ago would be less relevant today because of the pandemic. But the master plan study points to documents such as the visioning analysis, which was done 2 years ago, the Montgomery County retail study, which was done in 2017, the Montgomery Village master plan, the MCDOT transit study, all of which were done years ago. Are those similarly irrelevant?
Those are long-term, and they did not quantify absorption of square footage, lease rates, construction costs. They're much broader in scope.
And when we developed the master plan, what we took from those have proven to be the findings that have proven to be consistent even through the pandemic.
Tom and Sharon, I know this is something you guys don't like to talk about, the REA, but I would like to get kind of a confirmation or a denial whether or not you guys still believe some of what you drafted in 2018. I don't know if it just went to the city's website or if it was discussed within the city, if it was discussed by decision makers, or if you guys just drafted a study on the mall and put it on the website and perhaps no one looked at it, perhaps everyone looked at it. In the Lake Forest Mall study that you guys proposed, you go into great detail that the REA limits each owner's ability to develop their individual parcels without everyone's consent. You still agree with that, I guess?
Well, we're not here to discuss the REA, but the anchor owners, I believe, can redevelop within the footprints of their buildings, correct?
The footprints of their building.
Yeah, but they could redevelop within the footprints of their building. We have gone back through the REA. We've gone through some amendments. We do qualify that we don't know if there are any amendments or agreements that have not been recorded in land records because our information is just based on what was publicly available.
Well, the master plan is obviously a study that talks about the overall redevelopment of the entire 100 acres. And yes, individual owners can knock down their building and rebuild under the current C2 zoning, according to the REA. This analysis from your department says until all the parties agree to any modifications, the mall area will remain as retail space. That's what it says. Is that something you guys still agree with? That until all the parties agree, or one party buys all of them?
The C2 zoning would apply.
I'm talking about a redevelopment, Sharon, an overall redevelopment, which is what this entire master plan exercise contemplated. An overall redevelopment, not a tear down your building and rebuild within that footprint. Do you still agree that all the parties have to agree? Or one singular party has to buy them all before there can be an overall redevelopment, before this plan or any plan could be implemented?
I guess I'm not really sure what you're asking. Any individual owner could rebuild within their footprint, correct?
Only as retail space. So I guess what I'm asking, Sharon, is if you still agree with what you wrote, what you wrote.
That was under C2 zoning. So any use allowed under C2 zoning. But if you're going to rezone, then the master plan applies.
So these aren't my words, these are your guys' words. Until all parties agree to any modifications, the enclosed mall will remain as retail space.
The enclosed mall would be the area you purchased.
The whole thing. You asked me at one point, Sharon, very pointedly and disrespectfully, if I understood the REA. I understand it well. I'm asking you if you still agree, the physical footprint that's out there, all the buildings, no one can develop outside the walls of those buildings unless all the parties agree. Do you still stand by what you wrote? That's what you wrote.
Everything we've said about the REA, we are not attorneys. And the REA is an agreement that is private. So the city doesn't have any authority over that. When we read it for what was most likely. Now, if the parties have other changes, if there are amendments that have not been recorded, we would not be aware of those.
Well, there haven't been, and I'm just asking, simply, does everyone on this call agree that nothing on that 100 acres will occur other than potentially re-tenanting of the existing buildings or the demolition of the existing buildings and rebuilding existing retail buildings right where they stand today? Do we all agree that until all the parties, 5 of them, agree that nothing will happen, no matter what this master plan document says?
So
that's what you said in 18. I want to know if you still agree with that.
What we're saying is that C2 uses are allowed on the site. So if someone wanted to repopulate a building with a C2 use, that would be permitted.
Tom, it's a simple question. This was your department that wrote it. Do you agree that until the REA disappears, however that happens, one party buys them all the parties magically sing kumbaya and agree, nothing different than what we all see there today will occur? That's what you guys wrote. Do you agree?
Kevin,
will occur.
We provided an analysis of the REA, but I'm wondering why we're spending so much time on it right here.
Can I take a crack at it, Kevin?
Sure. I mean, Tom, it goes to the heart of the relevance of the master plan exercise that you guys are going through.
That from my perspective, and one of you said that I'm new to this, which I am, and so excuse me if I'm retreading over ground already covered in the past, but I'm reading the document that is intended to be the guiding plan for the redevelopment of the mall. So the plan to be implemented will be implemented by removing the mall and developing the ground. And I guess knowing that there is an REA in place that places significant limitations on the ability to implement this plan, why isn't it discussed in the document? Why isn't that part of the reality of the ability to implement this master plan? Because to me, without having some sort of a strategy or an idea as to how that implementation can occur, is the document really of any value? And I mean that respectfully. I'm not trying to be.
Bob, I understand what you're saying. And again, obviously you and Matt have been in the area, you understand the land use article. The master plan is to guide if redevelopment should occur. Obviously, the assumption is because the city is not a party to this REA and the 5 owners could get together tomorrow and dissolve that REA. The master plan inherently assumes things like that ownership. This is why we don't say who the owners are, who the developers are. It's if redevelopment should occur. So the assumption is that stuff would be resolved. There could be agreements tomorrow. Again, we're not a party to the REA, so it's not our place to discuss private legal contracts. And again, this is why we don't specifically call out individual owners or developers.
Wouldn't it have a caveat at the beginning, Rob, that says what you just say, which is the very sentence that says, despite what the following 60 pages profess might occur at some point in the future, a caveat at the beginning that says, until and unless all the 5 property owners get together tomorrow, as you suggest, and agree to allow all the other 5 property owners to redevelop their parcels as they and the city see fit, nothing will occur. That was the conclusion of the Economic Development Department when they wrote this. Should there not be a caveat?
And again, I'm not an attorney, but I don't even know if that's necessarily true, because again, what is to stop an individual anchor from rezoning and developing a sketch plan, which is not preliminary subdivision, and putting into place the MXD zoning? I believe you who had discussed with us, the REA is based upon construction. So that doesn't stop any of the other owners from beginning to implement at the sketch plan level and rezoning level the master plan.
In what world, Rob, and in what instance, give me an example where a private property owner knew that they could not build, could not construct what was contained within as you say, an MXD zoning application. They knew they couldn't build it, but they filed it anyway. Just
because again, and maybe this is a question for Bob, and again, we're not here to debate, but just for clarification purposes, did you say the REA allows demolition and reconstruction within the same footprint?
For retail space. Yes.
Only for retail space?
Correct.
Okay. Would that allow a mix of uses if it includes retail, or must it be, does the REA define that it can only be solely retail?
Solely retail.
Yeah, well, I think as a practical matter, building within the confines of the existing walls means that you're doing retail in a mall configuration. I mean, you're not implementing the master plan.
Hypothetically, you could rezone, Bob, and as you well know, if you took an anchor out, you could put a multifamily building in the same footprint, and especially with ground floor commercial, because you could phase the sketch plan that could potentially be in conformance with the REA, and you don't build out the rest of it yet.
What we are telling you, Rob, and what the other half of your staff has already told you in 2018 is that cannot occur. That cannot and will not occur. Should there not be a caveat?
And that's why I asked my clarification question. That's all.
And I mean, I'm reading from page 25 under existing conditions and context. It starts off saying, creating a master plan must take into consideration the existing conditions and context of the area, and then determine how best to respond to those characteristics through the plan's recommendations. And I guess my question goes back to how can we have a master plan that doesn't even mention the fact that there's this REA that is a significant impediment on the ability to implement this plan?
All right, so I'll move on from the REA, but is it a non-answer, Tom and Sharon, that is what you wrote in 2018. You said until all parties agree nothing else other than the retail space as you see it today will occur. That's what you guys wrote. Do you still agree with
Yeah,
that?
yeah, I haven't looked back at the document, but when you read it, at one point you were saying enclosed mall. Now, you also have non-retail uses in the mall now, correct?
There's probably stuff that falls underneath the C2 zoning category that you and I might not call retail,
Okay,
but that falls under the C2 zoning category.
This may help a little bit. It's the underlying fundamentals of this are that the mall itself and the structure of the financing involved, the value of the land, the leases and the terms that are all wound up in this ball, which is Lake Forest Mall, would dictate a planning process, which I don't yet think you all have undertaken. I think the plan that you've prepared is a master plan, more a vision document at a municipal level. When you bring in and start to reflect upon tools and techniques in planning, missing middle, for example, you know, which has been around for decades, and you guys have a lot of it in Gaithersburg already. Those are not tools for going to a site that's a 30 to 40 acre infill site and saying this is how you're going to apply development when that site is so encumbered by these layers of ownership and value and lease agreements and all these other things that are embodied within that plan. You know, missing middle was invented as a retrofit, as a municipal-wide tool to go in and insert strategically on a plot-by-plot level housing, like one home, a duplex, a mansion flat, a small apartment building, a cottage court. That's what that was for. So to impose a master plan, which I think is actually quite good at the level of your entire city, and then say, these are the fundamentals within which this property is going to be redeveloped, is missing completely the current conditions on the site and the possibility for its future development. And I'm saying that because, as was hinted earlier, you know, and as which you all from a municipal level would also agree, you know, 10, 20, 30-year planning, that's what you're there for. That's what's important. You want to be looking at how you're going to develop, redevelop, and ensure the quality of life and the employment and the housing opportunities for the people that come and move to Gaithersburg. And you're right, no one should say this is what the uses are going to be here and now. Things change, pandemic came. But you can't pick and choose what you're going to say is possible and then also limit at the same time at the site-specific level all the things that would make that project viable. The small area plan that you've done precisely limits all the tools that would be required to slowly begin the redevelopment of that project. So it is actually the opposite of broad and flexible. It is uniquely written to not do anything now. In fact, it is almost an invitation to wait for that to decline even further or to be repopulated to a point 10 to 15 years from now when people can get a second look at it, maybe come in, or the city itself buys the whole mall and becomes the master developer. At that point, everything that you wrote in that master plan would become realistic. As the city-owned property, you could parcel it off to individual smaller developers that do not require the attachment to funding mechanisms that are not flexible, right? Because only the biggest developers can do that. So everything that you're describing in this master plan is almost impossible to do on this site. So that's where I think the disconnect is yes, you've got a great master plan. It's a square peg in a round hole. Here we have a group of people in and around the mall itself who are eager to see redevelopment, you all wanting to see development, part of the ownership wanting to do the same thing, unable to do it because of the way this is written. So I think that's where the discussion is.
Rob, you drew certain highlights from the visioning analysis, the Montgomery County retail strategy, Montgomery Village master plan. Those things you listed in the master study under the existing conditions. You labeled them highlights. You said the city is forecast at approximately 20,000. Somewhere in here label the number of new jobs, I believe at 20,000 over the next 20 to 30 years. Is that correct? Is that right?
If that's what the document says, yes.
The visioning study quotes a job forecast number from two different parties, from Cura and from MWCOG. That ranges from 14,000 to 19,000. Does that sound correct?
Mhm.
That's what the visioning study says. Can you tell me approximately as to the approved development pipeline of office and research and development product, the approved pipeline of new stuff that's going to be built in Gaithersburg? How much of that, how many jobs does that account for?
Off the top of my head, I cannot, but it is available on the study on the project
Sure.
page.
Well,
Because
I know
we
what it
did
is.
do the pipeline and talked about how much of the projections were encumbered under pipeline development, both residentially and commercially. But Kevin, I don't have those numbers at the tip of my fingers.
It's roughly 80%. So the stuff that's already approved accommodates or would provide physical space for up to 80% of the projected new jobs over the next 20 to 30 years. As a matter of fact, if you go to the lower end of the spectrum, it provides for almost 100%, 10,627 potential new jobs in the pipeline. If you go to the higher end of that spectrum from MWCOG, it provides for roughly half of those by 2045. So that's 24 years from now. Just the existing stock of stuff would take care of that percentage of new jobs. Which makes me curious if there is an existing pipeline out there, not to mention nearly 600,000 vacant feet within the city, according to that analysis, the visioning analysis, almost 600,000 feet of vacant space. Why the recommendation or conclusion from you to have this be, in terms of the commercial component, be predominantly office, R&D, so forth? I get it. It talks about that being the largest job hypothetical generator over the next 20 to 30 years. But if that much of it is already accounted for by the current approved development pipeline, why are we burdening this 100 acres, which is, 1.5% of the total acres in Gaithersburg? It's not even 25% of the total, commercial space in Gaithersburg. Yet we're burdening it with the full responsibility, according to what you've written, to accommodate for any difference in where do I put this body who might have a new life science job or R&D or office? How did you reach that conclusion when it tells us that the vast majority of space needed to hold those bodies is already in the approved development pipeline? How did you reach that conclusion?
First of all, to clarify, reading that, the pipeline, as Bob and Matt, because they represent someone who has a sketch plan, oftentimes that pipeline reflects an either or. You cannot do the maximum build out of residential and the commercial on the same site. So many of the sketch plans, such as the Kentlands Commercial District Master Plan, has blocks that could be 100,000 square feet of office, or it could be 400 multifamily units. So, looking through, our discussion was, hypothetically, academically, we may be achieving that, but that's not the reality. Plus, again, we did look at, what are the hot sectors, and that held true. So again, that's where our recommendation comes from. It's also looking at what's surrounding, within a half mile of the Lake Forest Mall, not including the mall, is 1.2 million square feet of retail existing, that also has vacancy. So it was building in the other issues, job growth, job potential, wage growth, things like that.
Well,
So
we either look at that
we're
vision
not looking at it
analysis
sector
or
by sector. And again, to clarify, it's not my document. It is the city's document. This was a collaborative effort. Rob Robinson didn't sit down and write this whole thing unilaterally without buy-in or based upon things.
your signature is on all of it. So I don't know. It all says from Rob Robinson. That's what they all say. All this stuff says. So if I call it yours, I mean collectively everyone's, okay? But your name is on the front line with all this stuff. The visioning analysis clearly says that the highest percentage of people who live in poverty are on the east side of 270. The highest percentage of people who are unemployed live on the east side of 270. This goes back to is there any kind of urgency to do anything? Do those elements add to any kind of urgency, or is this just still simply some document that when and if the mall ever gets redeveloped, great. If it's 10 years or 20 years, do those things, poverty and unemployment, do they do anything to move the needle for staff in terms of, hey, how do we raise the urgency of something happening here? Anything? Or the unemployment and poverty, are they just ignored? I didn't make those quotes up. Those came from the study that you pulled highlights from. You neglected those highlights.
Not sure I understand the question, Kevin, about were they ignored?
It's about the urgency of doing something on the site within a reasonable time period, not necessarily tomorrow or next week, but also not within 25 years or 15 years. Again, it boils back down to, again, this plan that you have prepared is a plan at a level that really reads as elements of citywide planning. It's not a site-specific master plan because it's not implementable to address the issues that you're talking about.
It's simple, Tom. Does it raise the urgency to get something done sooner than later? The highest degree of poverty, the highest degree of unemployment on that side of town, does it raise the degree of urgency to get something done much sooner versus much later? Or do we still view this as a document that is, hey, whenever it happens, great? Or do we want to try and create an environment where we can have a massive redevelopment here to hopefully help address those two pressing social issues? Do they matter?
Yes, they matter. I don't know how else to say it. The
Why
objective.
are they not mentioned in the context of let's do something much sooner than much later?
I'm trying to understand. It seems like a lot of your questions relate to urgency rather than the ultimate vision. And
Sharon, I didn't write the master plan. You guys did. Rob didn't. Y'all did. Your own words said that it may take decades to occur. It may take decades to occur. That's true. That is true. That is shameful. It's shameful.
I'm not talking about that. I'm saying you seem to be forming most of your questions around urgency. Now,
I'm
if
not done yet.
Dimitri has specific items in the master plan document that prohibit interim change, then we'd like to hear what those
Look,
items are.
answering
How
the
about we
question-
approach it that way?
Answering the questions provides a certain item for the record. Not answering the questions provides a certain item for the record. Choosing not to answer it is fine. That's your prerogative. This is your phone call. We're appreciative of a chance to ask questions. I'll ask them, and you can choose to answer them or not. Something much sooner would help address those societal issues much sooner than decades. Decades is not the word we use. It's the word the city used.
And the city was describing ultimate build out. So often
It said
change
implement,
happens.
Sharon, it said implement. That means start.
Often change happens incrementally, and that is not prohibited by the master plan. So if there are hurdles that we have not identified in this plan that prevent incremental change, then we would like to hear what those are.
The same visioning document says that the current, and if the document that references Rob approved development pipeline is meaningless, then we shouldn't even be talking about that document. The document says the approved development pipeline of residential will satisfy the city for the next 10 years. It says the approved active and inactive will accommodate the city for the next 20 years. And yet we are being told or recommended or suggested to have 10-story tall apartment buildings, which the market will not support, 12 or 1,300 apartment units, which would take years to absorb. We know that. Y'all have told me that wasn't researched, but we know that it will take years to absorb. We know that the market won't support 8 to 10-story tall apartment units. And yet this document is saying, hey, in the active development pipeline, we have ample for the next 10 years. The active and inactive, I guess, means they just need to come re-pull their permit. There's enough for the next 20 years. Why is this 100 acres being micromanaged with, you ought to do 60% multifamily, you can only do 7% townhomes, you need to do whatever it was according to your definition of missing middle, which we'll get into. Why that level of micromanagement when the guiding document says there's enough for 10 years with all the active stuff and enough for 20 years with all the active and inactive? Could that not have been mentioned in this document? And if it's irrelevant, just say it's irrelevant. Or if it's untruthful.
I think also, just to expand on that a little bit. So yes, we're talking a lot about the urgency, and is there an urgency to see this plan implemented? And that does tie back to the vision and to the proposed uses. I think that's the connection that we're trying to make here, is that, and Dimitri was pointing it out as well, is that there's nothing wrong with the planning document that you've put together. In fact, it's got a lot of, the new planning lingo to it. It's got a lot of, new, cooler land use ideas. The question is it something that can be, that has a strong likelihood of being implemented on this 100-acre site with the conditions and the circumstances that need to be conquered for redevelopment to occur? So even to get these owners together to make the REA as dismissive as perhaps the plan wants it to be, there has to be a mix of uses that are there for the taking that the market is going to support. And I think, unless I'm missing the mark, that's where we're having a big problem with the plan, is that we don't think that the uses that are being proposed for this site are going to encourage the 5 owners to get together to wipe out the REA to allow the property to be implemented. So is it really a document for this property, or is it a planning document that is theoretical? And maybe I'm saying that wrong, and I'm sure Kevin will tell me if I have said it wrong.
I have specific questions, Bob, and I want yes or no or silence. Silence will serve the record just as well. That visioning document says, and this is a quote, the city will still need an additional 1,500 to 4,400 units of housing in the next 30 years. 30 years, and yet this master plan on this 100 acres, which is a far cry from the entire city. This is 1% or 0.5% of the entire city, whatever it is, 1.5%, says that this project needs to accommodate all of the southern end of that range of housing over the next 30 years. And oh, by the way, we're going to prescribe which types of housing you can put there. So the city's research says for 30 years, we might need 1,500, we might need 4,400. The master study says, okay, on this mall complex, if it's all redeveloped together, there can be 1,600 units, but there can only be so many of these very sort of different kinds. And we have no idea if they're supported by the marketplace. Alex, let me know if I need to put that in the form of a question.
And see, that kind of gets back to the crux of the disconnect between the master planning process at the broad, which is what you have done at the broad level, and then the specifics of this site and what could happen here. There's no mechanism to take what that is and bring it down to this level, which would be convincing enough to overcome the hurdles that live on this site now. I mean, if it was a blank site, there were no mall owners and it was one parcel, yeah, this would be fine. But there are serious issues on this site that need to be resolved, and it requires convincing for that to happen. And this document does that not at all. And in fact, it probably makes it harder to get to the point where there could be any sort of come together moment for the various ownerships on that site, because it's unrealistic. I mean, they would much more easily and readily go out and redevelop as they're allowed to do right now.
In one of the joint sessions, Rob, you were asked a question pointedly by one of the council members or planning commissioners about the aging stock of retail on the east side of 270. Do you know if the visioning study says anything about the aging stock of retail on anywhere in the city? Does it say anything about it or what should be done?
That's the county retail study. And I want to clarify one thing about, we're talking a lot about the visioning study. The visioning study also clearly expressed that the greatest unconstrained growth potential is on the east side of I-270, and in particular, the Frederick Avenue corridor. And it also clearly explained the housing type to meet the projected demographics going forward is larger size multifamily. So it was, again, the competition for space. So Kevin, I understand what you're saying, but if you're going to begin citing the visioning data analysis, let's make sure that at least we're framing it in the full discussion and not just grabbing snippets from the master plan. So that's what went into our consideration. That's why we skewed more heavily towards multifamily on this site, because going through, that is what's projected to meet that balanced growth projection going forward.
It is projected to meet all of it, and you're pinpointing all of it be met on this 100-acre site, which I don't like to use the word fair because it only comes along once a year. It's inappropriate. It's lots of people out with or other disparate pieces of property who own stuff that adds up to 100 acres, and yet we're being pigeonholed to solve all of that projected need in 30 years, according to its document. So if you want to talk about putting it in full context, that's what I'm getting at. Let's put it in full context. The Montgomery County retail strategy, it did say that as the Gaithersburg market continues to develop, it's recommended that retail within this market, submarket, be addressed by prioritizing the repositioning of aging retail space. Why wouldn't something like that be put into this study? If we're going to point to that document as being kind of a guiding light, why wouldn't something like that be put into this document?
Redevelopment is repositioning the retail space.
No, you go great lengths in this document to poo-poo certain types of retail space, and the underlying guiding light says that it should be repositioned. I'll get into that further. The Montgomery County study says that according to them, Sharon, this was pre-pandemic, so maybe it's all irrelevant. I don't know. It's 2017. Says that there's an imbalance of GAFO of 503,000 square feet. Imbalance meaning there's too much of it, in their opinion, in this submarket. The demolition of the mall, according to the same study, would eliminate 900,000 feet of GAFO, according to them. So a new redevelopment could, in theory, according to the plan that we've published and sent to you guys and asked for comment and not received any, where we demolished the mall, did a bunch of housing, did a bunch of other stuff, and included about 450,000 feet of retail. It would, by this very document itself, be in equilibrium. And I don't understand, Rob, why, again, if we're going to put things in full context, why would that not have been in there?
Related to increasing retail?
I mean, if you're too busy, we can do this another time.
No, not at all.
So
again, this goes back to your earlier question too. If you want to talk about equity and opportunity, this is why we want more than minimum wage jobs there. You know, we want to have the ability for job growth and job advancement and provide opportunities on the east side, which you yourself acknowledge is a depressed area.
what's minimum wage?
So a preponderance of you know, retail jobs, that doesn't necessarily benefit the east side of the city.
Well, preponderance is undefined. Minimum wage is undefined.
No, minimum wage is a flat rate that is firmly defined.
No, you're not defining it. Tell me what minimum wage is.
What does it go to? $15 an hour? Is it $9.50 an hour right now? This is where I turn my friends with economic
Okay,
development.
so you don't know. I mean, it's just.
It is a published rate and it is adopted by the county council. It is separate from the US rate and from the state rate.
So you're just saying that retail, whether it's 100,000 feet or 400,000 feet, which would put it, according to this report, in equilibrium, you're just saying whatever it is, it's minimum wage and it's a preponderance. So I don't think preponderance is defined and minimum wage is not defined. Am I wrong?
We would not be
What's preponderance?
stating a wage rate when the index to which it refers changes over time.
There's a federal minimum wage. You either know it or you don't know it. And it's okay if you don't. I mean, you just said it's minimum wage.
Minimum wage changes over time. This document would be adopted and in place. Therefore, we would not be specifying what the wage rate was at the time of adoption. We would just be referring to minimum wage.
So according to the underlying document to which you guys pointed to, there's currently about 1 million square feet in the whole city of Gaithersburg, 1 million square feet of too much GAFO, which includes 24 different uses, 36 different uses under GAFO. The demolition of the mall would take 900,000 square feet of that away, according to their own document. And if we added back up to 450,000 feet, it'd be in equilibrium according to their document. And if we're telling the full story, Rob, putting it in context, as you suggested, I don't know why it's their data from the same underlying document that you said you're drawing highlights from. You could easily say, look, any kind of redevelopment here up to this amount of square feet would leave the Gaithersburg market overall, the whole city, in equilibrium. Be easy. Instead of saying it should not have any more GAFO jobs, it should be focused on neighborhood goods and services. I think
We say it should focus on that in alignment with the study, but we don't preclude GAFO retail. Nowhere in there does it say you can't have that. It's discouraged, and the preference is experiential restaurants and neighborhood goods and services. And that's aligning with what the county retail study said. And that sort of aligns with what our visioning data analysis is talking about from a job creation standpoint.
Well, I don't know why you would discourage it if the proper context is to say, look, as they say themselves, there's an opportunity to accomplish this with the redevelopment of the mall.
But we don't prohibit GAFO.
But you discourage it.
What you have to look at is what does this actually control for? And it doesn't say you can't have GAFO.
Why would you even say you discourage it? Why not put it in the proper context and say, look, if we can reduce the GAFO here to a certain amount, then the Gaithersburg market will be in equilibrium. Why not say that?
What would you prefer, that we say something like that and actually limit amounts, or do it as we did, which doesn't limit GAFO?
Put it in proper context. Instead of saying we discourage GAFO, elected officials who have daytime jobs look at your report and they say, well, these are the professionals. They must know what they're talking about. They're saying
GAFO is in surplus. We have seen changes in the demand for GAFO nationwide, not just locally. But what we actually control for, we don't prohibit GAFO.
You know, the special conditions, Rob, what I've heard you describe on a couple of these other phone calls is that those are items that, as opposed to serving as a guide for planning commission and council, they must be strictly adhered to. So even if a future council, and as you guys have talked about, this may be a 10-year implementation or a 20-year implementation, if a future planning commission or a future council, in viewing an overall redevelopment as a whole, if they wanted to deviate from one of the special conditions that you guys are prescribing in 2021, they couldn't without asking staff to what, rewrite the whole master plan? Is that right?
No, you could do an amendment that would dissolve it by, public hearing process. You can do targeted.
In the propriety of the list of special conditions, only by way of example, we could go through all of them. The visioning study spent a lot of time talking about how many people drive to work, how many people drive to work out of town. The vast majority of them do not work in Gaithersburg. They drive out of Gaithersburg. 80% of them drive alone by themselves. Now, my neighbor has a Tesla. A few other people I know have plug-in cars. How long is that going to be the case? I don't know. But if 80% of the population drives alone to work, and the vast majority of them drive alone out of town to work, why on a 100-acre site would there be a special condition that said there shall be no filling stations on here? You all, I bet you all have a car. I'm sure just as soon as I say that, one of you is going to raise your hand and say, I don't have a car. Well, everybody I know has a car. They drive it to work, they drive it to shop, they drive wherever. I drove to a wedding this weekend. What? And the gas station offerings on that side of town are nothing to be particularly excited about. They have bars on the windows and bulletproof glass. I realize a new one's been approved at Watkins Mill and significantly south of us, the new Wawa, but why not? If it's 100 acres and everyone drives and they drive alone, why would there be any special conditions if this is a 10, 20-year document? B, why something like that? How did you arrive at that? Whoever arrived at that. Shall be no filling stations. One of you arrived at that, or maybe all of you did.
Because again, the discussion was if we're trying to promote multimodal transportation, especially with the number of gas stations that are in the immediate vicinity, the amount of land needed for that just perpetuates a single occupancy vehicle. And yes, I currently concur that in the near term and going forward, people will still drive cars, but that doesn't mean every redevelopment needs a gas station.
Rob,
Kevin, I'm not here to have a personal one-on-one argument with you. The document was there. It clearly expresses the following uses do not, either through their internal use or their design, do not reflect the vision stated. That is really the answer. If you're going to ask us point by point, why did you put that? That is the answer. It's written in the document. You should be able to answer.
You should easily be able to answer. We own more than half of the developable acreage there that you have described as being roughly, 79 acres when you subtract the detention ponds, which we also own, which you want to slap a permanent easement on to count for everyone else's green space on the overall development. You should be able to answer questions such as this.
I just did. It's explained in the document, Kevin.
It's not explained why you want to exclude gas stations. The merchants that sells batteries, okay, D-cell batteries, does not perpetuate the sale of flashlights, okay? The merchant that sells gas does not perpetuate the sale of internal combustion cars. Those are not connected. You said it perpetuates further driving in your car. That's untrue, and it's untrue. It doesn't perpetuate that. It makes it harder to fill up your car with gas. You have to go to one of the scary places on the east side of 270 and fill up with gas.
There's a gas station right at the terminus of Odenhall and 355.
How many people on the east side of 270? You tell me what the proper distribution is between bodies with cars and gas stations. There's not enough nice ones on that side of town. And I know that because we've heard from the best operators that operate in that region that want to be here. And they don't want to be here just because they want to be here with gas in the ground. They want to be here to serve customers, residents, voters, people who have cars. They own the batteries. They want to go buy the flashlight. And you guys have arrived at a conclusion that says, because it perpetuates something that keeps people from riding a bus, we're going to say no gas stations. Why don't you outlaw cars? You can't say why you included the exclusion of filling stations. I think that answers that question. I mean, everyone in the city drives to work. I mean, look, we've met with Back to Urgency. I've met with in person the leadership of Montgomery County Housing Opportunities Commission. They own Cider Mill. I communicate multiple times a week with Montgomery Village and their leadership, Asbury and their leadership, as well as their residents. I know you've had a call with some of their residents. They want to see something happen as soon as possible, as soon as can occur. Unemployment on that side of town is bad. Poverty on that side of town is bad. The city should be asking itself, you guys should be asking yourselves, what can we do as professional staff to encourage, or what can we not do to encourage the redevelopment of this mall sooner rather than later? Anything other than that is shameful, to be honest with you. Everyone around there wants it done. Montgomery Housing Opportunities Commission, who plans to spend millions of dollars on that apartment complex, wants to see this mall redone. They want to fix the issue that exists in that apartment complex, which is oftentimes a crime feeder into the surrounding communities. Montgomery Village wants to see this fixed because it's at the foot of their doorstep. Same with Asbury. And when they listen and they understand that the city is ambivalent as to whether or not it occurs soon rather than 10 years or 20 years down the road, they're appalled. Does that make any difference to anyone at the city? No difference.
That's not what we're saying. We'd like to see something soon. Again, if you and the other 4 owners wish to dissolve the REA tomorrow, we can begin implementing stuff.
Rob,
sooner.
you have no understanding of the market realities of making that occur. It's the single biggest piece of leverage each property owner has.
We get calls
another.
from multifamily developers nonstop looking for more opportunities here in the city. There is a hot market for multifamily. I can name you 3 different developers.
10 stories tall.
That if there was an opportunity to build at the mall, would probably act immediately.
Steel and concrete buildings, Rob?
I don't know. Again, I'm not here to debate, guys. You know, that's not being productive. But I'm not. But
you brought it up
to say that it's it's all our fault. It's not our fault. We're not a party to the agreement.
Rob, I think what we're trying to say is let's come up with a document that can be implemented. This
could be implemented if you guys dissolve the REA tomorrow.
No, the uses aren't marketable. They're just not, Rob. They're not responsive to the marketplace.
There will be no the ownership group now who looks at this and has to decide, how am I going to dump this? How am I going to sell this? How am I going to re-inhabit it and make money, 3-5-year leases going 15 years out with, a giant gym or whatever they're going to put in the footprint of their existing building, to get them to sit down at a table and agree that it's in their best interest to sell and unite and submit based on the planning document that you currently have. I mean, they'll look at it and then they'll say, no, it's too limiting there. It does not allow for them to extract themselves in a financially viable way. No one's going to build a 10-story apartment building in Gaithersburg. Nobody. It's not there. It will be in the future at some point. And yes, again, if the city bought this whole site, bulldozed it to the ground, or let it interimly operate in however fashion you see fit for 15, 20, 30 years, you would then be in the driver's seat to say, we're going to sell off this chunk. We're going to build some 5, 10-story apartment buildings here. We're going to wrap some garage deck stuff over here. We'll be able to put in some office buildings over there. All of that is perfectly viable and feasible, but it's not going to happen now. And as a result of it, as a result of everyone who's in the ownership of the mall understands that, they're not going to do anything about it. So this idea that we can just all get together tomorrow and dissolve the RA, it's not happening. It's not happening. And when they read the document and say, well, these are our options, they're going to say, here we go. We're going to put a Gold's Gym or or an earth fit in there now, or a church, or, you know, whatever, or maybe we can get one of those mini Amazon distribution warehouse hubs there. That's what's going to be happening on that site until the market catches up. And see, this document that you keep saying is so broad is actually very micromanaged in its percentages and its hesitancy to encourage the only missing middle type that actually works at the moment, the townhome. It's and limiting footprints of retail buildings that could be built there in an interim. You know, in the discussion phase that we're talking about, you could have an operator and a business locate there. Yes, it might be large format retail. It's probably going to be only there 15, 30, 20 years. And then it can repurpose, recycle, be redeveloped into high-rise multifamily or whatever. But to just kill it now and not care about the requirements necessary to get something to begin to molt, to change on that site, to wait for the climax condition that you have outlined in this document, is where the issue is, because there's life that occurs between that 25-year gap where the world meets your vision. So what do you do in the interim?
Quickly, Rob, it looks like maybe we've got about 23 minutes. There are some definitions that you use that pertain to the commercial space section of the master plan study. Experiential use, is there an actual definition of experiential use, or did you guys make that up? Is there an actual definition? And how would a use get judged as whether or not it's experiential or not?
Off the top of my head, Kevin, I do not remember. Kirk is not joining us. I believe Kirk developed that in coordination with economic development.
Incubator space, is there an actual definition, or is that just going to be a kind of discretionary judgment as to whether or not a space is incubator? These are spaces you guys recommend in the document. What's an incubator space, and who pays for it? What is it?
What was the definition in the glossary? Are you saying it wasn't in the glossary? Again, you're playing a gotcha game with me, which is sort of unfair because I don't have the document in front of me.
Well, you should, because that's the whole point of this phone call, is to go through the document. But it's a definition you guys manufactured. There is no definition of experiential space. There is no actual definition of incubator space. The closest thing you can come up with incubator space is that it's contained within a public-private facility that's for tinkerers who think that they want to create leather goods or think that they want to create artwork. And I want to know who created the definition that's contained within the master plan study. There's a definition you guys have, but it's not a real definition. I want to know where it came from. I have a right to know. If we're going to be held to this, what qualifies as incubator and experiential and what doesn't, and where the definition comes from. Much less what's a makerspace. There's literally a website called makerspace.com. What is a makerspace? There's 19 different definitions for makerspace. Again, makerspace is for wannabe artists, wannabe tinkerers, wannabe creators. They're found in public facilities, in a branch of a library or a branch of a civic center. And you guys are recommending, you're telling the decision makers, this is what private industry should build. And there's no definition of it. You guys made up a definition, but there's no real definition of it. I want to know, I'd like to know where those came from. You can get back to me if you want. You can email me and say, hey, here's, according to the gods of planning, here's what the definition of a maker.
So are you saying you don't like the definitions in the glossary?
Well, the definitions are made up, Sharon, first of all. Secondly, if I come forward with a redevelopment plan that has a certain particular tenant and I say that is a makerspace tenant, how in the world are any of us going to determine whether or not that's a makerspace tenant? Because there is no standard for what a makerspace tenant is. There's no standard. You're recommending it, but there's no standard. There's no definition. There's nothing in code. There is nothing that describes what a maker's. Why are things being recommended for which no one knows what the hell it is? That's what I'm objecting to. You look confused, but Rob, the missing middle housing, you tell me who created this definition of, in the master plan study of missing middle housing. There's an ample body of evidence out there as to what missing middle housing is. It's been around for 50 years. In planning terms, the definition has been around for maybe 7 or 8 or 10 years. A friend of Dimitri's invented the term, a guy at the Congress of New Urbanism, and he was emphatic, very specific, that missing middle includes a wide range of housing types within a bracket. And you acknowledge this in your write-up. That includes townhomes, includes bungalow courts and all kinds of other stuff.
So I can't answer that one. So in our discussion,
I'm not done with my question yet.
I'm sorry.
You chose to exclude townhomes from that definition because you said, we already have a bunch of townhomes. The other day at the chamber, you said, we want to focus on bungalow courts because we don't have any bungalow courts in Gaithersburg. Why are there no bungalow courts in Gaithersburg? Is it because the market won't support it? Is it because zoning won't allow it? Because there's no demand for it. If there were a demand for bungalow courts, there would be bungalow courts. And to exclude townhomes from the definition that you are providing to the decision makers, from the definition of missing middle, is disingenuous. It is the whole concept of missing middle is intended to be for an entire community. How do we implement a planning strategy for the whole community that encourages any and all of the missing middle housing stock types all across the city? It's not intended to be for a 100-acre chunk that you pick and choose which housing types. And yet you go on to say townhomes are not part of the missing middle. They should only be 7% of the 1,600. You say apartments shouldn't be part of the missing middle definition. They're part of the actual definition of missing middle. And yet you say missing middle, your definition of missing middle, or whoever's, I'm saying you because it was your signature. I don't know who created this. Missing middle should be this percentage of the allocated housing stock. It's an incorrect definition, and it's misapplied the whole concept of missing middle. You'd have been better off just not using the concept missing middle. One of the council members said, Rob, I've never heard that term before. What is it? And you gave him your definition. My question is, why would you exclude townhomes from the definition? Why would you exclude apartments from the definition? Why? Those are part of the definition, and it runs counter to the very idea, the very intent of missing middle housing, which is to be citywide. Why are those items excluded, and why are they excluded?
Well, more recently, apartments aren't included in the missing middle discussion. Two, we didn't include townhomes because
They're included in the
townhomes make up a
definition.
very large proportion of the housing stock within the city of Gaithersburg. So they're not really missing. Further, the price points for townhomes here in the city reflect those of Montgomery County. And if one of the underlying philosophical goals of missing middle housing is to create affordable price points to enter into the home ownership marketplace, townhomes really don't accomplish that in the city of Gaithersburg. We have townhomes being built throughout the city that start at $700,000. So that's really not a missing middle. That's not the same as a 2/2. That's not the same as a triplex. So yes, I get it from a nationwide perspective, and we acknowledge townhomes are considered in other communities missing middles because they don't have a lot and they fill in the same gap. They do not fill in that philosophical gap here in the city of Gaithersburg. That's why we excluded them.
And you guys arrived in the commercial section at the limit of 30,000 feet for any single tenant based on your discussion with one industry source who said that grocery stores are dropping on an average of plus or minus 40,000 square feet, such as Trader Joe and Aldi. Is that right, Sharon? I assume that was you and Tom.
We were looking at, because the focus was on neighborhood goods and services, the largest tenant in neighborhood goods and services would be grocery. So we looked at, okay, what are the footprints of grocery? But we did not limit GAFO, we did not limit big box, we simply limited the footprint. We did not limit the height, nor did we limit retail if it's in a mixed use building.
Rob, you said yesterday to the chamber, which I think is misleading. You said to them, quote, we arrived at 30,000 feet because nobody's building grocery stores that are bigger than 30,000 feet.
I don't believe I said that because again, I didn't weigh in on, I think
We'll
we said
take-
we based the 30,000, the analysis that came out of economic development, because that was the size of grocery stores being built.
Okay, that's the same thing I just said. It's not the size of grocery stores being built. The press is replete with articles the last few weeks about Amazon Fresh building new grocery stores that are over 30,000 feet. There's Wegmans, there's Harris Teeter, there's Whole Food. I imagine people would do backflips if we came forward with any of those. You know, last thing I gotta share with you. I mean, this master plan, I think it wants there to be one singular owner. I think you guys don't want it to be us. We'll leave that aside. It wants there to be one singular owner that redevelops the whole thing. Absent that, if there were 8 10-acre submissions, you say each submission must be at least 10 acres. It's unworkable. What if there were 4 applications that came in that got processed? Are you going to let them eat up the full allotment of townhomes? Are you going to enforce upon them equitably, equally, the first 5 or 6 applications? The need for you know, an equal part of office, R&D, you know, green space. We're getting burdened by your document. You're proposing putting a category 2 forest conservation easement on 15 of our acres. Does that mean that any of the other 7, 8, 9 applications can count part of our detention ponds as their green space requirement? It doesn't even wander into the reality that, hey, if this stays a fractured ownership and 7 or 8 applications come forward, 10 acres apiece, how does that even get manned? How does that even fit in this document? Is it equitable or fair or whatever words we want to use for the last guy in line? What if this first 7 applicants chew up all the townhome allotments? If they chew up all the missing middle allotments, and that's what they really want to do, are you going to say, okay, there could be 10 applications, so it's limited to 112 townhouses. We're only going to let each one of you do 12 townhouses. And
No, we wouldn't say that. We're going to review everything on an application by application basis. So you're asking me to weigh in. One, you know, it's council decision, but 2, in our review, it'll be reviewed based upon the application submitted, Kevin. So, you know, I can't hypothetically say nowhere in the document does it talk about apportionment.
oh, I know it doesn't, but it should. It should. If we're being burdened with 15 acres of green space as written, if the are you going to make each applicant come in and do 35% green space? If you do that, you're going to have way over 35% total when the whole thing gets built out. You're right, it doesn't talk about apportionment or an equitable distribution of anything. And thus creates an unworkable master plan if it remains owned by 5 different property owners who can then further submit 8 different 10-acre applications.
And that's the conundrum this sort of puts us back into. It's the groups that own there now, looking at this document, would by default not do anything because it's too vague, and where there's specificity, it closes the doors to options that would allow them to consider getting together to move this thing forward, which means it's just a weight. It literally creates weight. I mean, that's what this master plan does.
So then, to be clear, Rob, as you said the other day, in whatever this interim period ends up being, you know, whether it's 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, you said very clearly, and you've said it more than once, any of the property owners can do whatever they want under the current commercial C2 zoning, right? I mean, is there any disagreement amongst anyone at the city?
Again, you have the vested rights. So as we've mentioned, and I'm not going to consider the REA because that is yours, but
Understand.
this is property is zoned C2. You have the rights under C2. As long as you don't rezone or re-subdivide, you can continue operating under the guise of C2. That is a vested right.
Bob, anything you want to touch on before we go?
Rob, is this the same analysis that you did in the Kentland, sort of where you look at you're looking at the old master plan and your old site plan approval?
Exactly,
incremental
exactly,
uses.
Matt. It's the same legal foundation. So again, you guys know under our code, under state law, subdivision, the subdivision ordinance, and the zoning ordinance, the master plan, the current, adopted master plan comes into play with re-subdivision or with a rezoning application. But otherwise, the vested rights has been in place, all along creating this mall as a C2 property. That is the plan of record.
So
So
no
again, within those
subdivision,
things, so
no
even if you guys work to do away with the REA just to maintain C2, you could do, on the various shapes, you could infill the surface parking lots with additional C2 uses, and it would be processed as an amendment to final plan going to planning commission. And it would be judged under the existing plan. It would not be judged against this master plan per se.
And you understand the only reason why, it's not right why we bought this mall. We bought this mall to do a big, massive, wonderful redevelopment, not wait 20 years. None of the property owners there. Tom, I'm not sure how many of them by this point you've talked to are going to wait that long. They're simply not. I know what Penny's has told you. I know what Macy's told me they're about to tell you. If they haven't done so already, Tom, I know you reached out to them this weekend. They're not going to wait. They're not going to wait that long. Macy's sales are continuing to decline. Penny's is bleeding here and in 50 other places. And, you guys will be the ones that have to answer if there's a car dealer here in one of those buildings, if they sell it to a car dealer, which they can do. It's a permitted use. And I will tell you, I have heard from a major car dealer that operates in that region that has asked me a lot of different questions. And Sharon, you're shaking your head. It's happened.
I'm not shaking my head.
We rent spaces in that parking lot to 2 different car dealers today.
Kevin, we're aware of prospects in the market. I'm not shaking my head.
So it should be, but we should be together. We should be collaborating. This is a contentious phone call because we're wasting a couple $100,000 every month feeding that thing, which we are not going to continue doing. JCPenney is losing $500,000 a year just for the privilege of owning that dumb thing. They're not going to continue doing it. We should be doing together, all of us, everything we can to try and say, all right, WRS, I may not love all of your plan. Let's saw off the rough edges. I may come to you and say, I don't like all of your master plan. Let's saw off some of the rough edges. Let's get this thing going. To say, it might take 10 years, it might take 20, is a shame. And if the residents find that out, and if something happens that prevents any kind of redevelopment, we will simply leave town, and you guys will have to sit there and explain what the hell happened. And we want to collaborate. Rob, you embarrassingly told the focus group of owners that you absolutely were not going to collaborate with any of us. And it's a shame. We own the real estate, for heaven's sakes. Yes, you're the government. Yes, you have powers granted to you. Use them wisely, for heaven's sakes. We own the property. We're paying all kinds of money to continue owning it. We're not going to just bleed for the next 20 years until this becomes something that the market will support. If we thought the market would support it, of course we would do it. Do you think we're hell-bent on doing something that is just a thing that we want to do, a Ferris wheel and ponies, and if the code won't allow Ferris wheel and ponies, we're not going to do this other thing that's just as viable? Of course we would do it. To prescribe 1,300 apartment units, Rob, will take years to absorb. I don't care how many phone calls you've gotten from apartment developers. I probably talked to every single one of them. That's what you've prescribed. 70% of 1,600, 1,250, 1,300. How long will it take to absorb that many? Look, is that what the visioning study from how many years ago said is the predominant thing on that, in the city, perhaps? Does that mean it needs to be all 70% apartments over there that will take forever to get absorbed? Why not the thing that the market is supporting um, most rapidly today? You say 700 grand is not affordable. You tell me what the market rent would have to be on a multifamily unit, new construction, an 8 to 10 story tall, multifamily thing, which is what you're recommending. You are not telling me because I suppose you don't know. The market will not support it. If we thought the market would, we'd be happy to build it. Bob, I have a feeling we've exhausted any responses. Is there anything-
I just think that, I don't want, none of us want this to be a contentious process moving forward. And I don't know the background. I don't know the history of this to date. Matt and I are just getting involved in it. I would much rather be working with staff on coming up with a plan that is going to be followed by an MXD application that's going to allow the property owners to get together and collaborate, that could actually be implemented. And I'm a little perplexed as to why we're looking at a plan that doesn't have the input of the property owners, that does not appear to be responsive to the market, that is not going to be implemented anytime soon, if ever, at this location. And so instead, I'm talking to Kevin about what uses, how to retrofit them into the stupid frigging mall that is just is a dinosaur. And why are we trying to perpetuate a bad situation when we should all be working collaboratively towards coming up with a viable solution to it? And I just don't feel like we are right now. And I'd like to know how we can turn that around and get it to a point where we're working collectively on a viable plan.
Especially for the affordable housing component, which I think is a honorable and very important goal in any community. And again, taking into consideration the structural makeup of what this mall is, even the missing middle housing that would be developed on it, if you could find a builder that could do it in mass, you're still talking a per square foot value and an in value that will be out of reach for just about everybody. That will not be solved by missing middle. That's solved by municipal policies, tax abatements, homesteading, utility free hookups, all kinds of subsidies that have to come in to make, because the land is the land. That's how much it costs. The infrastructure that's there needs to be put back into it. Can't be shouldered by a different housing type, right? Even the smallest housing types in Kentlands now are out of reach of everybody. So it's not the house type. It's the policy that creates affordable housing. House type is an ingredient of that, but it's not the end of the equation by any means. So again, things that we all need to think about. I think that we could come to an agreement with and a strategy for walking the long path to get to this vision document that you've got. There has to be a middle lifespan of things. Right? Some things will pop up that aren't necessarily great. They'll eventually go away. You'll achieve certain things, and by the end of the day, you'll get to where you want to go. But there's got to be a mechanism for that to happen that is both financially viable, market-driven viable, shows progress on the site, keeps politicians happy in Gaithersburg. And this document doesn't do any of that at the moment.
John, just before we go, I've been told by more people than I can shake a stick at that, John is the kind of guy that formerly did an extensive tour of duty as a developer, understands this side of the business well, yet is someone credentialed that someone like Dimitri, who when I first came up there with Dimitri, I probably said the wrong thing and said, look, Dimitri's overkill for a project like this. But we purposely brought Dimitri up there to show that we have someone in our corner who speaks all of your language very well, understands it all, can turn back to me and say, Kevin, this component, it's okay. Here's how we're going to accomplish it. That component is okay. We want to work together and figure it out. We keep getting told we will not collaborate with you, landowner. Wait and see what we, the government, tells you you can do, which we're saying, look, is not supported by the marketplace. If it were, we'd love to do it. Dimitri understands all of this stuff in a planning document, has to decipher a lot of it to me. Is the whole reason why we had him involved, John, is to hopefully come up there and say, look, we're not the bumpkins from South Carolina. We have somebody who really knows his stuff and has been involved in that region extensively on a project that the city is very proud of. We want to do that. I know no other way to put it other than to say we have got to get going sooner rather than later. And it's not only our own financial pressure, and don't mistake financial pressure with losing the mall. We're simply not going to keep feeding that mall to the tune of a couple $100,000 a month. It's the other property owners I'm scared to death about. Scared to death that they're going to do something rash that screws it all up for all of us. And I know I'm a broken record. As of January 21, the world is very different with the ownership of all of those other anchors, at least two of the other anchors. John, we want to get started as soon as we can. And you don't have to deal with me because I realize that I'm viewed as the knuckle dragger who doesn't know how to express a point without making people mad. Dimitri does. Dimitri does, and he knows how to talk to me. And we want to get going. There's process.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that, Kevin, and we have tremendous respect for Dimitri. You all just have to understand that our marching orders from the mayor and council was to create a document that will lead to something epic, to a game changer, a renaissance on the east side of the city. That's going to, be a catalyst for change. And that's and led by the community in our extensive outreach in the fall. So, and that's what we think we've created here. And I mean, you have a lot of comments. We want to hear them, and you need to submit them for the record. They'll be factored in by the mayor and council and planning commission. But as Tom and Rob said at the beginning, we're not in a position to change this document at this time. I mean, we've got to get direction from the mayor and council and planning commission.
There's no harm in you talking to Dimitri, I think, and saying, hey, hypothetically, WRS, Dimitri, your client, maybe here's some rough edges they could solve off. Maybe you could say hypothetically, maybe there's some rough edges the city could solve off of their document. There's nothing wrong with you two talking. We've been told so far, there shall be no collaboration. Why not? Why not arrive at that planning commission hearing where you guys are telling planning commission, hey, nothing, we're staff, we don't make decisions. We've tried to talk to the people who own half the acreage there that's developable. We've got some ideas.
I think the other thing, is and Dimitri can speak to it, and I can't, and Kevin can't, and Matt can't, which is what is theoretical in terms of epic, and what is something that's able to be implemented that's epic. So I feel as if we're working towards a theoretical plan that is super cool, cute, doesn't really relate to this property, at least not in this master plan cycle, and perhaps not even in 2 master plan cycles. Why are we doing a plan that's a 30-year plan when we should be doing a 10-year plan? And that's the last thing I'm going to say. So, and I know we've used up our time, and thank you. You've been very generous to give us this time.
And I think we can answer that and help the city council and the planning commission understand that as well. Because time, epic just requires time. There's nothing that's epic that can't be done with the right amount of time. shorten the time frame, you have to raise the cost and the value and the money involved. You could achieve epic. That's a whole different process, and not one that is being undertaken at this time with this site, which is why there's a little bit of disappointment on this end as to how we get to where you want to be with the vision that you've prescribed citywide in this document, which I agree is great. But to work at this specific site that is encumbered as it is, there's many interim steps that have to happen. It would be awesome to be able to work with you all, because this is different than Kentlands, right? So this isn't a farm. There are other pressures here that need to be taken into consideration. And I think a fantastic plan will eventually end up here, a great development, but there's going to be steps along the way. So that's all.
Tom, thanks for setting this up. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you all for joining us today.